Private William Slaper, a member of Company M in the 7th U.S. Cavalry Regiment, participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876. After surviving the brutal conflict, Slaper later wrote about his experiences, providing a detailed and honest account of the events from a soldier's perspective, a valuable historical document. Before we continue, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Lieutenant Sturgis and I were part of Company M, leaving St. Louis in high spirits, heading toward Fort Abraham Lincoln near Bismarck, Dakota, on the Missouri River, the 7th Cavalry's base. A small incident along the way might bring a smile to your face. During a short stop in Fargo, Dakota, for food and coffee, we had a couple of hours to spare. An Irish sergeant, looking like an old veteran, directed some recruits to take their canteens and rifles to a nearby saloon, exchange the weapons for liquor, and return with the alcohol in their canteens. When they came back, he gathered another squad, armed them as guards, and marched them back to the saloon. There, he scolded the owner for buying government-issued weapons and retrieved the pawned rifles. In this way, the sergeant managed to secure a good amount of whiskey without paying a cent. I have to admit, I thought it was a clever move. From Fargo to Bismarck that night, the sergeant's car was filled with a lively and cheerful group of soldiers. For a minute, we arrived in Bismarck without any problems, where we crossed the Missouri River to reach Fort Lincoln. At the fort, 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry were stationed, and we knew recruits were assigned to our designated units. As previously mentioned, I was assigned to M Troop, which had recently returned from a reconnaissance mission. A few days later, we left for Fort Rice, where we spent a quiet winter. The cold was harsh, often dropping to 40 degrees below zero. One of our duties was cutting ice to fill the large ice house, a resource the infantry would later use while we, the cavalry, were out on the dry plains, drinking water that was high in alkalinity. When spring came, we received orders to return to Fort Lincoln. There, we set up camp and prepared for an expedition against Sitting Bull and his hostile Sioux warriors. These warriors had abandoned their reservations in large numbers, causing various disturbances. Several Sioux sub-tribes, with their families and additional ponies, gathered at a meeting point later identified as being along the Little Bighorn River in the Montana Territory. Months earlier, Captain Tom Custer, the general's brother, had been dispatched to Standing Rock Agency on the Missouri River, about 40 miles south of Fort Rice. His task was to capture Rain in the Face, a warrior wanted for the murders of Dr. Hansinger, an Army veterinarian, and Mr. Ballerin, an Army post-settler, who had strayed from their command. With the help of Charlie Reynolds, General Custer's chief scout, Captain Custer captured the warrior and brought him to Fort Lincoln, where he was imprisoned. However, Rain in the Face escaped during a prison break and joined the hostile forces, vowing eternal vengeance against Captain Tom Custer. On May 17, 1876, the 7th Cavalry, commanded by General Custer, departed from Fort Abraham Lincoln, with General Alfred Terry supervising the campaign. Our regiment was recognized for its exceptional horses, men, and gear, testament to Custer's dedication to maintaining a top-tier unit. At that time, there were few comforts in the wild expanse of the Northwest Plains. As a young recruit, I paid little attention to the daily events, unlike the older soldiers who kept thorough journals. For this reason, I regret not being able to recall specific dates, camp locations, and other details as well as I would have liked. I was merely a novice, inexperienced in surviving the wilderness or battling native warriors. But I would soon gain ample experience over the following 6 weeks. Our first day's march was grueling, and we camped along the Little Heart River. There was a bit of excitement as some of the horses, well rested and fed after their winter break, became unruly and difficult to manage. That night, our camp was further stirred by a prairie fire, and we had to fight the flames to prevent them from spreading to our camp. Fortunately, the damage was minimal, and we eventually settled in for the night. Everything proceeded without incident until June 1st, when we entered the perilous badlands of the Little Missouri. After a taxing day, we retired to our tents, only to be awakened the next morning by a snowstorm. Our pup tents, which were shared by 2 men, offered little relief. The cold was intense, and both men and horses endured significant hardship. Yet we managed to push through without any serious setbacks. Nothing remarkable occurred until we reached Powder River, where 4 companies of the 2nd Cavalry, along with artillery and infantry, joined our expedition. At Powder River, our wagons were sent back, and our sabers, including those of the officers, were packed up and sent along with them. The regimental band also departed. From that point forward, pack mules were responsible for carrying our rations, extra ammunition, and supplies. Scouting missions suggested potential dangers ahead, although no formal reports were issued. On June 22nd, we left Powder River. General Terry offered Custer 4 companies of the 2nd Cavalry, but Custer declined, asserting that his regiment could manage any native village on the plains alone. He also rejected the Gatling guns. Our march on the 22nd was brief, approximately 12 or 15 miles. The following day, we covered about 30 miles, and the day after we traveled a similar distance. However, we were awakened during the night for a night march, which confused me since we were supposed to rendezvous with General Terry near the Bighorn River on the morning of June 27. I am not privy to General Custer's exact orders from General Terry, other than the written instructions now publicly accessible, which most scholars of the Custer battle are likely familiar with. It seemed that the general consensus among the men was that Custer and Terry had agreed to meet in the Little Bighorn Valley on June 27th. This unexpected night march played a significant role in exhausting our horses during the Battle of Little Bighorn. With poor grazing conditions and traveling in light marching order, our horses received very little rest and minimal grain. I distinctly remember stopping at dawn to make coffee, but I fell asleep beneath a tree, holding my horse's bridle, and didn't awaken until I was called to fall in line. We didn't unsaddle, so our animals got very little rest. This was the critical morning of June 25th, filled with anticipation and tension. We knew we were on a hot trail and could encounter the Lakota at any moment. As we moved swiftly through the morning, the excitement built, and every action was observed with great curiosity. Around noon, General Custer gathered his officers and issued orders. Our Company M, led by Captain Thomas French, along with Companies A and G, was placed under Major Marcus Reno's command. At the time, we didn't know General Custer's plans or how many companies he led, but we later learned that Companies C, E, I, F, and L were under his direct command, while Captain Benteen led Companies H, K, and D, and Company B, under Captain McDougall, guarded the pack train. As I recall, Captain Benteen's command veered left, while General Custer's command continued straight ahead along a tributary of the Little Bighorn River on the right bank. Major Reno's command, including our company, marched parallel to Custer's on the left bank. Soon after, Adjutant Cook arrived with orders from Custer, and we turned sharply left, quickening our pace. We descended a hillside toward the Little Bighorn River, with Company M leading the crossing, followed by Company A, and Company G bringing up the rear. Suddenly, rifle fire erupted and bullets zipped through the air. Instinctively, I ducked, trying to avoid being hit. It was my first experience under fire, and I must admit, fear overwhelmed me. The sight of the native warriors, riding fiercely, yelling and howling like apparitions from another realm, was overwhelming. They were mostly bare, their bodies adorned with menacing markings. After crossing the river, we dismounted in a forested area, preparing to fight on foot. The No. 4s held the horses while Nos. 1, 2, and 3 advanced to the front lines. As we dismounted, our horses sensed the danger and became restless. Some broke free, carrying their riders into the open, right into the Indians' midst. We never saw young Smith from Boston again, neither alive nor dead. As we established the firing line and spread out to the left, the Indians grew bolder, encircling us, stirring up a dust cloud that allowed them to outflank us and strike from behind as we tried to retreat. It was on this line that I saw my first comrades fall, Sergeant O'Hara, then another, and another. Strangely, I was no longer afraid, despite knowing the hopelessness of our situation. The Indians were everywhere, their gunfire relentless. It became clear we could no longer hold our position, and word came to pull back to the horses in the trees. We ran back as fast as we could. Amid the chaos, some of the men holding horses released them before the riders reached them, leaving some soldiers stranded and exposed. Reno was said to have turned to Captain French and asked, "Well, Tom, what do you think of this?" French supposedly replied, "I think we ought to pull out." Reno then ordered us to mount and retreat, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear was the ceaseless barrage of rifle shots, the sharp cracks of cavalry carbines, the war cries of the warriors, and the cries of my comrades. By the time I reached my horse, I saw that our numbers in the woods had diminished significantly. Soon after, Private Henry Coltsbutcher, Captain French's aide, was struck in the abdomen just as he was about to mount his horse. He fell, and Private Francis Neely and I quickly dismounted to assist him. Together we dragged him into a dense thicket, hoping the Indians would not spot him. William E. Morris, another soldier, came to our aid, and we did our best to tend to Coltsbutcher, who appeared to be fatally wounded. We left him with a canteen of water and quickly remounted, eager to catch up with the others retreating toward the river. After the battle, we found Coltsbutcher's body exactly where we had left him, untouched, unlike the horrific fate that befell many of our wounded comrades in the river bottom. Our retreat from the river wasn't entirely orderly, but I didn't witness any chaos either. Many men were ahead of me, so I can't say exactly how they retreated or in what order. I didn't cross the river at the designated ford, but had to leap my horse into the stream where the bank was 6 or 8 feet high. My horse nearly lost its footing as we landed in the water. Looking around, I saw Trumpeter Henry Fisher of M Troop riding while clutching one of his stirrups. Hodgson, who was wounded and on foot in the stream, was being pulled across by Fisher, who had bravely rushed into the water to assist him. As they neared the opposite bank, a shot rang out, and Hodgson collapsed lifeless. I assume he was killed instantly. My own situation was perilous as well. Urging my horse through the water, I noticed Indians swarming the ford above, many riding their ponies at full speed toward that spot, seemingly paying no attention to me. Perhaps they thought I was not a significant target, focusing instead on larger ones. Bullets zipped past me, while warriors on both banks and in the water clashed with our troopers. Death seemed to be all around, but somehow I managed to cross the stream unharmed. The ford crossing became a deadly trap for many of our men, and the retreat up the steep bluffs on the opposite side claimed 29 lives. I believe the thick dust, kicked up by the horses and ponies, played a significant role in helping many of us escape. The dust was so dense that it was nearly impossible to see more than 50 feet in any direction. Amidst the chaos, between 2,500 and 3,000 Native Americans were charging on their ponies, kicking up a dense cloud of dust. After crossing the river, I had to ascend the steep bluffs, so rugged that many of the horses, worn out, could not carry their riders to the top. Riders had to dismount and guide their horses up the slopes, all the while under heavy gunfire from Indians concealed in the brush along the riverbank. As I made my way up, I passed the lifeless form of Dr. DeWolf, one of our surgeons, who had been shot while attempting to reach the summit. Upon finally reaching the crest, I found myself unharmed and joined Captain French along with around 20 other men. Throughout the battle, Captain French maintained an impressive calm, showing no signs of fear. His composure and courage were truly commendable, and I found comfort in his leadership. Yet, I grew increasingly anxious about the rest of our troops and the whereabouts of Custer, wondering why he hadn't delivered the promised assistance. It seemed as if we were on the brink of being overwhelmed before any help could arrive, as the Indians began to surge up the bluffs, attempting to surround us. Soon after, Captain Benteen arrived with his 3 companies, looking relatively unscathed compared to Reno's shattered forces. I couldn't help but wonder where Benteen had been and why he hadn't come to Reno's aid at the river's edge. His absence seemed odd, especially considering Reno's timely retreat, which likely spared us from meeting the same fate as Custer. Once Benteen joined us on the hill, we mounted and attempted to move toward where Custer was believed to be, but the overwhelming number of Sioux warriors and their intense fire pushed us back to our original position on the hill. Even there, we were not safe, as Indian sharpshooters took positions on higher ridges, showering us with heavy gunfire. We quickly took up the best defensive position we could find, setting up a makeshift hospital surrounded by our horses tethered to the ground. We formed a battle line outside the horses, and the fighting grew even fiercer on both sides. We were ordered to lie flat on our stomachs, staying low to avoid being hit, as even the smallest movement would provoke a volley of fire from the native warriors. Before long, we were transporting more wounded men to our makeshift hospital. Many of the Indians had positioned themselves on higher hills, out of reach of our short-barreled carbines. Fortunately, our first sergeant had joined us, bringing his personal rifle, which helped him silence some of the Indian fire from those elevated positions. Captain French, calm and composed, directed the operations from the center of our line, sitting upright as bullets flew in from all directions. I was in awe of his composure as he cleared jammed cartridges, reloaded rifles, and surveyed the battlefield without a hint of fear. Our fortifications were basic, and I recall using my butcher knife to dig into the earth, building a small mound to support my carbine. At one point, a bullet hit the edge of the mound, sending dirt into my eyes and temporarily blinding me. Later that afternoon, while lying flat, a bullet cleanly severed the heel of my left boot, as if it had been sliced off with a knife. That was the closest the native warriors came to me, but I witnessed many of my comrades face far worse fates. Amid the chaos, there were moments of humor. One of our own, Happy Jack, known for his cheerful demeanor, continued to laugh through the barrage of bullets, lifting my spirits and giving me courage. Another time, while I was helping carry a wounded comrade to the aid station, we briefly forgot to stay cautious and stood upright. A bullet zipped past my comrade's ear, knocking him to the ground. Fortunately, it was only a graze, and after a quick check, I assured him he would be fine. When I returned to my position, the man beside me was shot through the shoulder, taking him out of the fight. The heavy firing continued until dusk around 9 in the evening on the 25th. We then worked to reinforce our defenses and make our breastworks stronger. At sunrise on the 26th, the battle flared up once again. As the light spread across the horizon, a stray pack animal wandered past our line, still carrying its load. 2 other troopers and I stood up to assist the animal. Thanks to my experience with packing, I quickly began untangling the ropes, but the enemy spotted us and fired a volley, forcing us to dive for cover. One bullet hit the corner of a hardtack box in the pack, and we quickly removed it and abandoned our efforts, rushing back to our positions. Those were the first shots fired on the morning of the 26th, marking the start of another day of fierce fighting for both the troopers and the native warriors. The night before, Major Reno and other officers made sure we stayed alert, walking among us to prevent anyone from dozing off. It was hard to resist the urge to sleep after the excitement of the previous day, but we got little rest. For Omini, when the battle resumed on the 26th, Dr. Porter, the sole surviving surgeon, called for volunteers to bring water to the wounded who were crying out in anguish. It was a perilous mission, as the warriors were positioned behind the brush on the far side of the river, controlling every path to the water. I was not part of the first group, but I joined the second. We moved cautiously down the hill through a ravine until we reached its mouth, where it met the river. We had to cross an open stretch of about 30 feet to get to the water, fill our canteens or camp kettles, and return under fire. The first group hadn't thought to assign marksmen to silence the enemy with rifle fire into the brush. However, when my group went to fetch water, sharpshooters were stationed to cover us while we filled our containers and made our way back to the ravine. Even with this protection, an enemy shot struck the camp kettle I was carrying, causing me to lose most of the water. After several attempts, we managed to fill all the containers and return to the hospital, where the water was a lifeline. I've read Captain Godfrey's account, which states that all those who volunteered for the water mission received medals of honor from Congress. But I never received such a medal, nor did I hear of anyone else being awarded one. During our trip to the stream, we found Trooper Mike Madden, who had been shot in the ankle in the ravine. Mike, a tough man, had been with the first group. Sadly, his leg was later amputated in the hospital. In a somewhat humorous moment, the surgeon gave Mike a heavy dose of brandy before the operation. Mike took it like a true soldier and didn't utter a sound during the procedure. Afterward, he was given another drink, and with a satisfied smack of his lips, he whispered to the surgeon, "Doc, how about cutting off my other leg?" Mike later worked in the harness depot of the department in St. Paul. My comrade Jim Weeks and I made the water run together. When we returned, Captain Moylan asked Jim for a drink, but Jim responded, "You go to hell and get your own water. This is for the wounded." Moylan didn't say a word, but I'm sure it stung. After delivering the water to the hospital, we returned to our positions on the line. I had just settled down when the man to my left, Henry Rutten, took a bullet through the shoulder. The day passed slowly, with Captain French remaining upright, directing the firing, and withstanding the enemy's bullets without flinching. Though we were surrounded by thousands of better-armed warriors and outnumbered 100 to 1, I no longer felt fear, despite the slim chances of survival. I must commend Major Reno for his exceptional conduct during the fight on the hill. I had the opportunity to observe him twice in the river bottom, where he remained completely unshaken. His composure under pressure was a true mark of leadership, especially given the lack of support from Custer. As promised, our ammunition was nearly gone during the fighting in the bottom, and if we hadn't retreated to the hill, our fate would have been sealed. I remember seeing Reno walking among the men throughout the night, tapping them with his boot to keep them awake. It was an impressive display of courage, since even the slightest movement could draw enemy fire. I am still amazed he wasn't shot, and his steady demeanor undoubtedly inspired the other officers and troopers. I've heard claims that Reno was drunk during this battle, but I can confidently say that's false. I never saw any sign of intoxication or saw him drink any liquor. As night fell on the 26th, the warriors withdrew, giving us a chance to lead our starving horses to water. I couldn't find my own horse, so I took another, a fine black one that I later learned belonged to Captain Weir. After that, the shooting stopped, and we stayed in place through the night. The next morning, we held roll call, and many men were missing. Thanks to John Ryan, our first sergeant, I have a copy of that roll call, with the dead and missing marked. As we watched a large dust cloud rising from the valley, some thought the warriors were returning, but we soon learned it was General Terry's command. It must have been a terrible shock for him, as he was supposed to meet Custer on June 27th for a joint attack on the village. When he arrived at our position, he tearfully shared what he had seen of Custer's command. It was beyond comprehension. This was our first clue about Custer's fate, and it was a devastating blow, as every man had friends in Custer's companies. None of us thought such a crushing defeat was even possible. We prepared to move the wounded, and sadly, many horses too injured to continue were put down. We were then ordered to the site of Custer's defeat to bury the dead. With only a few shovels, we did our best to lay them to rest, but the conditions were horrible. We could only scrape away a bit of dirt, roll in a body, and cover it with earth. Some remains were left exposed, but the horrible stench of decaying bodies, which had been baking under the hot sun for 2 days, made a proper burial impossible. The many dead horses only added to the horror. I didn't have time to look over the entire field, but from what I saw, it was clear that these men had been caught off guard and killed quickly. It seemed like many had shot their horses and used them as makeshift breastworks until they met their end. In one particularly gruesome scene, we found 2 men lying between the legs of their dead horses, showing just how fast and brutal the attack had been. The bodies had been stripped of clothing and valuables, suggesting the women had plenty of time to loot and desecrate the soldiers without interference. The mutilations were too horrific to describe, with scalping, skull-crushing, and flesh-slashing. Some victims, likely wounded, had arrows shot into their eyes, necks, stomachs, and other weak spots. I saw Captain Tom Custer's body, which was the most mutilated of all, with countless arrows piercing it. His death was believed to be the work of Rain in the Face, seeking revenge for his arrest at Standing Rock Agency. Captain Custer's body was found near General Custer's, with Adjutant Cook's body close by. Cook's face was partially scalped, his distinctive sideburns gone with it. General Custer's body, on the other hand, was untouched, with only 2 bullet wounds. Some believe the native warriors spared him out of respect for his bravery, while others think they wanted his white comrades to easily identify him. Boston Custer's remains were found near his 2 brothers. Nearby was the body of Mark Kellogg, the journalist who had joined the expedition. Their location, closest to the river, suggested they made a final desperate stand as the overwhelming force quickly closed in, leaving them little time to defend themselves. I took part in burying this group, making sure to cover Custer's body with extra earth, creating a mound larger than the others. It's hard to imagine how Custer's body went unrecognized when a party returned the following year to retrieve the officer's remains. Unlike the others, his body was not mutilated, and the large mound we built should have clearly marked his grave. The native warriors likely took great pride in knowing Custer had fallen, as they feared him as a relentless and formidable opponent. He was a fearless and courageous soldier, though demanding as a leader. He had several horses, allowing him to switch mounts often, while our worn-out horses, weighed down by heavy loads, were exhausted before the battle even began. Our horses not only carried us, but also blankets, carbines, revolvers, haversacks, canteens, 10 days' worth of oats, and 150 rounds of ammunition, adding over 10 pounds to their burden. With the forced night march to reach the Little Bighorn, it's no surprise our horses were spent before the fight. Some of these weary animals were brought in by the rear guard, including my friend's horse, which had given out, saving him from the battle. Forced marching was a contentious issue, as it was widely believed that Custer disregarded General Terry's orders. I have a copy of Terry's written instructions, which state that Custer was to follow orders unless he had a strong reason to do otherwise. The instructions also mention that Terry's and Custer's columns were to encircle the native warriors, making it impossible for them to escape. While the order doesn't explicitly state June 27th as the meeting date, it implies that Terry expected to be present when the attack began. Custer was under arrest by order of President Grant, and his desire for glory and redemption may have driven him to take a risky gamble. When he first saw the village, he must have realized his force was too small against the thousands of warriors. Many, myself included, believe he made a critical mistake by splitting his command. Had he kept his forces together and attacked the village from one end, he might have succeeded, or at least forced the native warriors to flee. I once asked Captain French, who fought in the battle, what he would have done in Custer's place. He said there would have been no fight. Officers are usually hesitant to criticize their peers, so it's significant that Captain French was willing to share his thoughts. None of the officers who fought in the battle have publicly stated whether Custer was right or wrong to divide his regiment or engage the native warriors before Terry's arrival. After burying the dead on the Custer field, we moved to the Reno battle site in the river bottom. The dead were buried where they fell, and the scene was horrific. Isaiah Dorman, a Black Scout and interpreter, was found with multiple arrows and severe slashing wounds. Corporal Henry Scallon's leg was severed, and Jim Turley had a hunting knife driven into his eye. Gordon, Myers, and Summers of M. Troop were also mutilated beyond recognition. I didn't see Charlie Reynolds' body, but I doubt it was treated with respect. Many other bodies were scattered throughout the timber, but I didn't see them all. Our retreat from the river bottom was timely, as the overwhelming number of warriors and their constant reinforcements made our escape a stroke of luck. I credit Reno's leadership for saving our lives. During my dash for the river, a warrior came so close that I could have struck him with a saber if I had one. My comrade Smith, whose horse ran into the enemy lines, may have been captured alive. From our position on the bluffs, we saw many fires in the native village on the night of June 25th, with warriors dancing around them. I feared they might be burning and torturing captives at the stake. After the burial of the dead was finished, our next task was to move the wounded from Reno's command. Given the limited resources, transporting them to the supply steamer Far West, which had been waiting orders at the mouth of the Little Bighorn, was no easy task. But we did everything we could to make them as comfortable as possible. Many were carried on travois made from teepee poles left in the abandoned native village. Although this method of transport wasn't ideal over such rough terrain, it was the only option we had. I hope this first-hand account gives you new insights into the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for more videos like this. I plan to bring you more first-hand accounts of different battles. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.